The People's Pharmacy podcast is supported in part by CocoVia. CocoVia cocoflavanols support both cardiovascular health and cognitive function by promoting healthy blood flow. That transports oxygen and nutrients to vital organs and muscles, including your heart and brain.
CocoVia now comes in an even more concentrated formula with 450 milligrams of cocoflavanols, 5 times more than the leading dark chocolate bar and 15 times more than the leading cocoa powder.
CocoVia has a proprietary process that preserves cocoflavanols at the highest levels. The product undergoes rigorous testing at every stage to guarantee the highest level of cocoflavanols per serving and to provide the purest, highest quality product possible.
People's Pharmacy listeners can now try CocoVia for 25% off by using the code PEOPLES25 at cocovia.com. How well do you feed the bacteria in your belly? If you love chips and dip, maybe you need to add broccoli sprouts to the mix. This is the People's Pharmacy with Terry and Joe Graydon. Why is our microbiome so important to our overall health? With the coronavirus a constant threat, we need to assist our immune system in every way possible. Optimizing our microbiome is one way to do that.
Are there medications that can disrupt the bacteria in our intestinal tract? Everyone knows antibiotics can throw the microbiome out of kilter. But what about acid-suppressing drugs like proton pump inhibitors?
Coming up on the People's Pharmacy, find out why you should be putting plants on your plate. Welcome to the People's Pharmacy. I'm Joe Graydon.
And I'm Terry Graydon. How are the microbes in your digestive tract doing? Most of us don't spend a lot of time thinking about our microbiome, but it's crucial to our metabolism, our hormones, and our immune system. How well do we treat this internal ecosystem? Are there medications that could be harmful to microbes that are so important for our well-being?
To help us answer these questions, we turn to Dr. Will Bulsiewicz. He's a gastroenterologist, gut health expert, and the author of more than 20 articles published in top American gastroenterology journals. His book is Fiber Fueled, the plant-based gut health program for losing weight, restoring your health, and optimizing your microbiome.
Welcome to the People's Pharmacy, Dr. Will Bulsiewicz.
Joe and Terry, it's a pleasure to be here with you. I'm excited for our conversation all about gut health.
We're looking forward to it as well. Now, I have a rather personal question to ask you, Dr. Bulsiewicz. Is it true that you were once a junk food junkie?
It's completely true. If you went back 10 years, I had a radically different diet that was built on a foundation of processed food, Cheetos, Doritos, hot dogs, Italian cold cut subs. Those were the foods that I loved. If it was my birthday, I went out for a ribeye and a glass of red wine. And those are the foods that I enjoyed, but they also were holding me back and affecting my health.
Now, what's wrong with a lot of people do that? What's wrong with junk food? It's cheap, easily accessible. You can find it almost everywhere. No cooking, tastes great, fills you up. It seems like it's the perfect package.
It's the perfect package if you're the owner of a junk food business. But if you think about us as humans and our biology, we were born to consume natural food. And in the last 100 years, we have taken natural foods and removed the healthiest parts of those foods, like the fiber. We take them out, throw them in the trash can, and we keep around the least healthy parts, and we throw it into a package, and it stays on the shelf for 6 to 12 months. And then you open it up, and it's as fresh as it was the day it was produced. And it's not something that those chemicals that are being added are good for our microbiome. They're simply not.
Well, and based on our reading of your wonderful book, Fiber Fueled, it's not just that the food additives are bad for our microbiome. It's that we're not giving our microbiota what they really need. which is in large measure fiber and phytonutrients.
These microbes they're invisible, so it's a little bit hard for us to wrap our mind around because you can't see them. But they're concentrated in our colon, and they're as alive as the three of us, as alive as your listeners right now. And they need food. And if you don't feed them, just like us, they grow weak and malnourished and at some point cease to exist. But when you feed them, you empower them, you make them stronger, and they become more capable of doing their job. And their job is to support our health. They're there to fight for us. They want to help us. And so in order to make that possible, we have to give them their preferred food, which is fiber. Fiber is found in plants. All plants contain fiber.
Well, wait a minute. I mean, the idea of feeding bacteria seems so bizarre. I mean, most people take their microbiome for granted. It is what it is. Unless it goes awry, like maybe after a course of antibiotics. Why would we want to feed our microbiome?
These microbes have been a part of human history from the very beginning. If we were to trace back to the first man, that first man was not sterile. That first man had a microbiome. And we have evolved with these microbes, and during the course of human evolution, we have grown to trust them with very important parts of our health. This is more than just digestion. This is our immune system. 70% of our immune system is connected to our gut. This is our metabolism. Whether or not we gain weight or lose weight, whether or not we have type 2 diabetes and insulin resistance, all connected back to the gut. This is the balance of our hormones. This is our cognition, our mood, our memory, the way our brain works. And believe it or not, Joe and Terry, it also is our genetic code. These microbes control the switchboard that is our human genetic code. And that is incredibly powerful. And if you take a step back and think about this, access to the nutrients that we need for life, our metabolism, our immune system, our hormones, our cognition, and even our genetic code, I've basically just summarized everything that's important for human health, and it all connects back to your microbiome.
Well, I think that's a big surprise to a lot of people. And at this moment in time, when a pandemic is roiling the entire world, people are very interested in their immune system. Is it really true that the microbiota affect our immunity?
If you were to zoom in, Terry, if you were to zoom in on your gut and your colon, what you would see is a single layer of cells so thin that it's invisible to the naked human eye. And on one side is 70% of your immune system. And on the other side of that single layer of cells are 38 trillion microbes. And they're right there in close proximity. They're talking to each other. They are not separable. When you damage the microbiome, you damage the immune system. And when you enhance or strengthen the microbiome, you are enhancing or strengthening the immune system. And to me, right now, there has never been a time where it is more important to support a healthy gut microbiome, because when you support a healthy gut microbiome, you are supporting your immune system, which is what we need in the setting of a pandemic.
Well, we get this, Dr. Bulsiewicz. This sounds really important. But you also mentioned when we mess up our bacterial balance. So there are a lot of ways we do that. One of the ways is with antibiotics. And I'm thinking, we've kind of had a love affair with antibiotics for decades. We assume that they're perfectly benign. And yet you talk about this dysbiosis, this imbalance that can last not just for days, weeks. In some cases, there are antibiotics that can mess us up for years.
Penicillin was the greatest discovery in the history of modern medicine. It added years to our life. Prior to penicillin, the top causes of death were not heart disease and cancer. The top causes of death were infections. And we found something that was so good that we decided to start using it for everything, including the sniffles. And most cases of prescriptions of antibiotics, unfortunately, are either unnecessary or excessive. And that has consequences, because when you take an antibiotic, it's not just killing the bad bacteria, it's killing the bacteria, including the good ones. And this is why it's very important that we reevaluate the need for our antibiotics. It's not that we should not use them. It's that we should not use them to excess. And this is creating issues in terms of harming our microbiome.
Well, there are very important arguments to be made in favor of antibiotic stewardship, using them only when they're essential and very carefully so that we don't end up with a lot of infectious bacteria that are resistant to the antibiotics. It's interesting to hear that antibiotics also have a personal effect on our microbiota. Are there other medications that can upset the balance of our microbes?
There certainly are, and we don't have a complete handle on which medicines do, in fact, upset the balance of our microbes. To date, there's only a limited number of medicines that we've actually done the studies necessary to determine whether or not they affect our microbiome. It's interesting. Metformin is a medicine that is used to treat type 2 diabetes. We've been using it for 25 years. And it was just recently that we discovered that part of the way that it treats type 2 diabetes is by altering our microbiome. And one might say that that is actually a beneficial effect from the metformin. But there are other medicines that we have concerns about. Proton pump inhibitors, which are the most widely prescribed drugs in the United States. Things like omeprazole or esomeprazole, which is Nexium, things of this category. We have concerns that this is having a negative effect on the balance of our gut microbes. It's been connected to the development of small intestine bacterial overgrowth. And one other medicine that I'd like to bring to mind is so widely used, I would expect that virtually 100% of the people listening to our radio program today have used these medicines, and those are non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs like ibuprofen, aspirin, naproxen. These medicines also, we have concerns, may be having negative consequences on the gut microbiome, and we're using them by the billions of doses in the United States.
So the take-home message is, when it comes to medicines, be thoughtful, be kind, be nice to your microbiome. Don't get carried away with PPIs, and maybe be cautious about NSAIDs. Is that it?
I think that when we rely excessively on pills and procedures and ignore the benefits of diet and lifestyle, then we create undue consequences. When we take medicines and we expect that taking the medicine is the solution, and we ignore the opportunity to change our diet or to change our lifestyle, then we run the risk that this may have downstream ramifications. And so to me, it's diet and lifestyle first, and accepting that there is a place for medicine, but it should be the lowest dose necessary. And in a perfect world, we should be taking steps to try to come off the medicine when possible.
You're listening to Dr. Will Bulsiewicz. He's a gastroenterologist, which means he's an expert in gut health. He was once a junk food junkie himself, so he knows the benefits of changing our eating plan to optimize our microbiome from personal experience. His book is Fiber Fueled, the plant-based gut health program for losing weight, restoring your health, and optimizing your microbiome.
After the break, we'll talk about how our diets and lifestyle choices can influence our microbiota.
The essence of Dr. B's advice is to eat more fiber, and that means eat more plants.
Why is fiber so important? And what is it actually?
Dr. Bulsiewicz has a way to remember the healthiest high-fiber foods, F-Goals. Find out what it stands for.
Keep listening, and you'll also learn what's so special about broccoli sprouts.
You're listening to The People's Pharmacy with Joe and Terry Graydon.
The People's Pharmacy podcast is sponsored in part by Kaya Biotics. Kaya Biotics offers the first probiotics which are both certified organic and hypoallergenic.
All probiotics are produced in Germany under laboratory conditions with high-quality ingredients and under strict regulatory oversight.
The 3 available formulas are created for very specific purposes, such as strengthening the immune system, fighting yeast infections, and helping with weight loss.
To learn more about Kaya Biotics probiotics and the important topic of gut health, you can visit their website, KayaBiotics.com. That's Kaya Biotics.com. Use the discount code PEOPLE for $10 off your first purchase. Welcome back to the People's Pharmacy. I'm Terry Graydon.
And I'm Joe Graydon.
The People's Pharmacy is brought to you in part by Cocovia, maker of high-potency cocoflavanol supplements that support cognitive and cardiovascular health. More information at cocovia.com.
Also by Verisana, an analytical laboratory providing home health tests for hormones, gut health, and the microbiome. Online at verisana.com.
Today we're talking about how to optimize your microbiome. What do you feed the bacteria in your digestive tract? Chips, dip, pretzels, ice cream, or sauerkraut? What about mushrooms or seaweed? A Japanese diet includes plenty of both. Maybe that helps explain the longevity of Japanese people.
Our guest is gastroenterologist Dr. Will Bulsiewicz. His book is Fiber Fueled, the plant-based gut health program for losing weight, restoring your health, and optimizing your microbiome.
Dr. Bulsiewicz, you've just mentioned that diet and lifestyle are absolutely critical to us maintaining our health. What can you tell us? What should we know about diet and lifestyle that's going to help us stay healthy?
I think it comes back to concepts that are actually quite simple, Terry, which is that imagine the life of your grandparents or your great-grandparents. Did they eat processed foods? Because right now, 60% of the American diet is processed foods. Did they consume an excessive amount of meat and dairy, cheese, eggs? Was that making up 30% of their diet? Because right now in the United States, the average person in the US eats more than their own body weight in meat on a yearly basis. When you think about their lifestyle, they didn't have television. They didn't have a cell phone. They didn't have a laptop computer. They didn't have Twitter. They exercised. They were outdoors more often. They had recreational activities that were outdoors. They didn't have cars to drive them everywhere they wanted to go. Life has changed dramatically in the last 100 years. And I would argue that those changes have all had undue negative consequences on the health of our gut microbiome.
Dr. B, you mentioned in Fiber Fueled a golden rule. Tell us about your golden rule and tell us why you think it is so important.
As we discussed in the first segment of our show, the preferred food of your microbiome is fiber. But I want everyone to understand that these microbes, they are alive and they have a personality just like us. They're not all uniformly the same. They are individually unique. And just like us, they have different food preferences. They are picky eaters. And each plant has its own unique blend of fiber. That unique blend of fiber is going to feed specific microbes. Let me give you a quick example. If I eat black beans, there are specific bacteria that will thrive because I'm eating those black beans. But if I take those black beans away and say I'm not eating beans anymore, those same microbes that thrive on the black beans, they're going to recede. They're going to grow weak and they're not going to be able to do their job anymore. What this means is that if we want to build a healthy gut microbiome, we need as many different varieties of plants as humanly possible. And I want you guys to understand that this is not just Dr. B coming up with an idea. I would not put my professional reputation on the line for an idea. This needed to be scientifically validated. And in the largest study to date to connect diet and lifestyle to the health of our microbiome, when they did their analysis, this is, by the way, called the American Gut Project by Dr. Rob Knight, who's at the University of California, San Diego. When they did their analysis, the single most powerful predictor of a healthy gut microbiome was the diversity of plants in the diet. The golden rule is to eat plants with as much diversity as possible, diversity of plants.
Well, you've mentioned fiber a number of times, but I think, we take it for granted, and a lot of our listeners are going, well, specifically, what's he talking about? So black beans. All right, we get that. But what is fiber? And what are the various kinds of fiber? I mean, when I think about apples, I go, well, maybe there's fiber. What about bananas? That's kind of soft and mushy. Is there any fiber in bananas? So give us a crash course in fiber.
Joe, in order to give your listeners a crash course, I need them to do me a favor first and delete the memory of their grandmother stirring the orange Metamucil drink so that she could have a bowel movement. Delete that memory from your memory bank, and let's start over with fiber. Fiber is incredible. It is exciting. I think, honestly, it's sexy because there is a science to fiber that we haven't tapped into until very recently. There are many different types of fiber in nature. I would argue there's at least millions, if not billions, of varieties of fiber, but it's very chemically complex. And that chemical complexity is to the point that our scientists haven't really given us an accurate number of how many types of fiber exist. All plants contain fiber. To keep it simple, we break fiber into two main categories: soluble and insoluble fiber. Insoluble fiber is the roughage. It's the grit. Soluble fiber is the type of fiber that if you put it into a beverage and stir, it will disappear. It will dissolve entirely. These two main categories of fiber, we separate them out because they're different in terms of their behavior. Soluble fiber is what we call prebiotic. Prebiotic means that it feeds the microbes inside of us. So soluble fiber doesn't just go in the mouth, pass through 20 feet of intestine, and come out the other end. Soluble fiber goes through the small intestine untouched, and it arrives into the colon where the microbes get into an absolute feeding frenzy. This is their preferred food, and you are giving them the meal that they are starving for.
So give us some examples of where we might find this soluble fiber. Joe mentioned apples a few minutes ago. Apples are a good source of soluble fiber?
The beautiful thing about this, Terry, is that we don't need to discriminate or preferentially select only specific plants to find fiber. All plants contain fiber. All plants contain prebiotic soluble fiber. Apples are an excellent source of prebiotic soluble fiber, but you'll find this in bananas too. And bananas also have resistant starches, which behave prebiotic in a similar way to this soluble fiber. So from my perspective, the way that I see it is this: I want you to pretend that these plants are your friends, because they are. They're trying to help you. They're trying to heal you. So I want you to build a diet with as many different friends as possible. But realistically speaking, you're not going to spend an equal amount of time with every single friend that you have. It's very natural to have foundational friends, core friends, your best friends. And for me, I encourage people to make the superfoods their best friends. And that's the approach that I take. I want all the plants, but I have the foundational ones that I try to eat, if not every day, at least a few times per week.
Do you have a list?
I do. I actually have an acronym that I remember. It makes it very easy for me to remember this list. And my acronym is F goals, F for fiber, F goals. F stands for fruit and fermented. G stands for greens and whole grains, whole grains. O stands for omega-3 superseeds, like flax, chia, and hemp. A stands for aromatics. These are the flavor foods. I'm talking about garlic, onions, shallots. L stands for legumes, Legumes, to me, may be the most powerful gut healing food that exists. And S, when I got to S, I apologize. I kind of had a lot that I wanted to say. So I have 3 different things for S. Shrooms, meaning mushrooms. They're technically not plants. They're fungi, but we will make them honorary plants. They do contain fiber, and they're incredibly good for us. S also is for seaweed, which really should be sea vegetables. They have unique types of fiber that you will not find in terrestrial plants. And finally, perhaps the best for last, my third S is sulforaphane. Sulforaphane refers to the phytochemical that you will find in cruciferous vegetables like broccoli, cauliflower, Brussels sprouts. It is the most powerful cancer-fighting phytochemical that I've come across. It is an absolute cancer crusher, and I try to get sulforaphane into my diet on a daily basis.
Now, we've heard about some special aspect to broccoli, and it's like, what is it, broccoli sprouts? Or what's the other term for it, Terry?
I'm not sure.
Well, broccoli, maybe you can help us, Dr. B. What is it about broccoli? And is there some special broccoli that is especially high in sulforaphanes?
So this sulforaphane is what we would call an isothiocyanate, which is a sort of class of cancer-fighting phytochemicals. When I use this word phytochemical, just to be clear for your listeners, what I'm referring to are the chemicals that you will find exclusively in plants. So what that means is if you want it, you got to eat plants. And there are thousands, at least 8,000 different phytochemicals that exist in nature. Like, for example, resveratrol is an example of one. And if you want those things, you got to eat plants to get them. Sulforaphane is a cancer-crushing phytochemical. You will find it in all of the cruciferous vegetables, including broccoli, including cauliflower, Brussels sprouts, arugula, kale, etc. But, Joe, to answer your question, the most concentrated source of sulforaphane is, believe it or not, broccoli sprouts. Broccoli sprouts have up to 100 times more sulforaphane than fully mature broccoli. And if you've ever had broccoli sprouts, then you know they're bitter. And I say, embrace the bitter, because of that bitterness is the cancer-crushing phytochemical going to work trying to protect you. And broccoli sprouts, by the way, real quick, Joe, I hope you don't mind, you don't need a patch of dirt to grow broccoli sprouts. All you need is a mason jar and some seeds. It takes about 5 days.
Yeah, come on, get real. A mason jar, water?
A mason jar, some water, about 5 days, all that you're going to do. And by the way, this is all described in my book. All you're going to do is rinse the seeds routinely a few times a day and give it about 5 to 7 days, and nature will take care of itself for you.
Now, Dr. Bulsiewicz, people are listening to you describe all these wonderful fiber-rich foods, and they are thinking, what about the consequences? If I eat a big bowl of beans or a super serving of broccoli, I am going to have gas. What do you do about that?
Terry, I think that it starts with really understanding what's happening within your body. When you produce gas or you have discomfort after you eat a fiber-rich meal, that's indicative of the fact that you have consumed more fiber than your body is used to you doing. And I want people to know that this is not inflammation. This does not mean that you're actually injuring your body. This is simply sloppy digestion. And the reason why there's sloppy digestion is because there's a threshold or a limit to how much of each particular food we're capable of consuming. And that limit is determined by the constitution or makeup of our microbiome. These microbes, they contain enzymes to help us to unpack and process our food. And if you don't have the proper enzymes because, as you suggested, you don't eat beans on a regular basis, and then all of a sudden you have a big bowl of 5-bean chili, you're probably going to feel it. But that's not because you're not capable of eating the 5-bean chili. It's that you're not used to eating beans and you ate too much all at once. So we need to properly train our gut and make it stronger.
So training the gut, it's just like learning how to do push-ups, huh? Before you do 10, you need to do the first few.
That's 100% correct. The gut is like a muscle. It can be trained. What that means is that if you exercise it, which means the routine consumption of those foods, if you exercise it, it will grow stronger. It will become more adept at processing and digesting those particular foods that you may be sensitive to right now. You're building on that weakness. You're getting the strength back in your gut. You're restoring the function. And the way that you do that is by taking these areas of sensitivity and acknowledging, look, that's one of the weaknesses within my gut, and I want to make it stronger. So I'm going to introduce those foods low and slow. You start low and you go slow and you ramp up over the course of time, just like you would in the gym. It would be unnatural to go to the gym on your first day and grab the heaviest weight that exists. That doesn't make sense, and you'd likely hurt yourself. When you go to the gym, you start off with a nice low weight, whatever it is that you're actually capable of doing, and then you do that, and next time when you come back, maybe you do just a little bit more.
Well, that sounds fine, but I guess there are a lot of listeners who are going, yeah, but if I eat beans every other day and lentils and all those other good, healthy foods, I'm going to fart. I don't care what he says. What about things like Beano? And in India, they use something called asafoetida. It's hing in India. There are a lot of ways to combat gas. Do you have any recommendations?
Sure. Well, first of all, one thing that's interesting that I find to be very exciting is that as your gut adapts to these gas-producing foods, you start to produce less gas. So that adjustment that occurs as you exercise your gut actually makes you more efficient at processing and digesting these foods. And that's one of the beautiful things that occurs as you start to train your gut. I do agree that using Beano, which is alpha-galactosidase, it's an enzyme. I completely agree with using the Beano. And if you're cooking beans, it's good to soak the beans. And you can also cook them with kombu. Kombu is a type of seaweed. I mentioned before how healthy seaweed is. If you cook with that, that has some of the enzymes that help you to break down those sugars that are gas producing. You know, when it comes to gas and bloating in general, Joe, there's a number of things that you could think about doing. You mentioned India. In India, it's common practice to chew on fennel seeds after a meal. And you could do that at home. You could chew on fennel seeds, but you could also create fennel tea. And it's a very soothing tea to have after a meal. Other teas that I think are beneficial, or I find to be beneficial with my patients, are peppermint tea or ginger tea. They're all very soothing to the gut and help you to relax and overcome some of the gas.
You are listening to gastroenterologist Dr. Will Bulsiewicz. His book is Fiber Fueled, the plant-based gut health program for losing weight, restoring your health, and optimizing your microbiome.
The F goals stand for fruit, fermented foods, greens, grains, omega-3 fats, aromatics like onions, garlic, and thyme, legumes, shrooms, which is short for mushrooms, and sulforaphane. That's why broccoli is so important.
Maybe the old refrain, an apple a day keeps the doctor away, has some sound basis. Your microbiota thrive on the fiber from apples.
After the break, Dr. B will tell us about his conversion from being a steak lover to becoming a vegetarian.
How does he use this newfound dietary science to help his patients?
Do fermented foods have a special place in helping to optimize your microbiome?
We'll also discuss prebiotics as well as the better-known probiotics.
You're listening to The People's Pharmacy with Joe and Terry Graydon. This People's Pharmacy podcast is brought to you in part by Verizana.com.
Verizana Lab offers home health tests that allow you to monitor your hormones and health conditions. You can take control of the quantitative assessment of your health and learn about male and female hormone balance, the stress hormone cortisol, leaky gut, gluten intolerance, or your gut microbiome.
Take a more active role in tracking your health and take 20% off your first order of a mail-in testing opportunity with the discount code PEOPLE. That's PEOPLE, all uppercase. To learn more, go to Verizana.com. That's VERISANA.com. Welcome back to the People's Pharmacy. I'm Terry Graydon.
And I'm Joe Graydon. The People's Pharmacy is brought to you in part by Kaya Biotics, probiotic products made in Germany from certified organic ingredients. KAYA Biotics.com.
And by CocoVia, maker of high-potency cocoflavanol supplements that support cognitive and cardiovascular health. More information at cocovia.com.
Also by Verizana, an analytical laboratory providing home health tests for hormones, gut health, and the microbiome. Online at verisana.com.
Today, we're talking about how to feed our intestinal microbes to maximize our own health as well as theirs. What should you know about both pre- and probiotics?
Our guest is Dr. Will Bulsiewicz. He's a gastroenterologist and author of Fiber Fueled, the plant-based gut health program for losing weight, restoring your health, and optimizing your microbiome.
Dr. Bulsiewicz, in Fiber Fueled, you describe your conversion to a vegetarian lifestyle. Would you describe that for us right now, please?
Sure. It's quite simple. Picture a 30-year-old guy who was a great athlete in high school, a 3-sport athlete, who's now 50 pounds overweight, has fatigue, low energy, low self-esteem, has high blood pressure, and a tremendous amount of anxiety. And that was me. And I was living in Chicago, Illinois. I was the chief medical resident at Northwestern, and I was miserable. I felt 60 years old. Something had to give. I tried to exercise my way out of it. And although I could build muscle and I could build endurance, I could not fix my gut. I could not fix these medical issues. I could not lose the weight. And it was the discovery of a plant-based diet, which, interesting enough, it happened to occur when I was on a date with the person who's now my wife. She ate radically different from me. We would be on a dinner date and she would get a whole bunch of different plants. And what I noticed is that she ate without restriction, in abundance. She was eating until she was full. She was enjoying her food. She did not have the post-meal hangover that I did, and she had complete control over her weight. And that opened up my mind to the possibility that there were things that I was not taught in my conventional Western medical training at elite institutions. There were things that I was not taught about diet and nutrition that I really needed to learn to heal myself. And I started down a journey that ultimately led to me making healthy substitutions over the course of time. It was not a spontaneous, hey, here's the day this occurred. I started to make healthy substitutions over the course of years and leveled up my diet. I started to devour the science. I discovered this path to better health through the consumption of a plant-based diet. I brought these principles into my medical practice and started to treat my patients with fiber and a plant-based diet with amazing results. And it got to the point where in 2016, it was not something that I could contain in my office. I needed to share this message beyond the walls of a clinic. And I started my Instagram account with zero expectations. And fast forward now 4 years, and here I am on the People's Pharmacy discussing my New York Times bestselling book. So that's sort of the process that happened.
I would like to ask you a little bit about the use of these principles in the clinic. You describe a patient who came to you. You call her Kristen, and she had seen a lot of doctors, but she still felt terrible. Can you tell us how you and Kristen figured out what to do for her?
The solution, from my perspective, begins with the acknowledgement of the root of the problem. We can apply labels like GERD or irritable bowel or constipation. We can apply labels, but that doesn't give us insights into the root of the problem. And what I've discovered in my study in this process is that the root of these issues is damage to the microbiome. It's a loss of balance, a loss of harmony, and the development of what we call dysbiosis. And so for me, my approach, and it always occurs on a personal level, whether it's Kristen or whether it's a different person, I always am looking to individualize my approach, but to get at the root of the problem. And in these cases where I'm taking care of these patients with digestive issues, the root of the problem is the microbiome, and therefore the solution is to heal the microbiome and reverse dysbiosis. And that's what I always look to do.
I'd like to ask you about some of the foods that you talk about in your book as being especially conducive to a healthy microbiome. And one that comes to mind is something that's been around for, I am guessing, hundreds, if not thousands of years, and that's fermented foods. Before there was refrigeration, before there were preservatives, before there were artificial thises and that's, fermentation was something that our ancestors were very familiar with. Why are fermented foods so helpful to the microbiome, and what are your favorites?
All cultures in human history included fermented foods as a part of their celebrated food tradition. They are deeply intertwined with our human nature. And when you think of fermentation, I want people to think of the word transformation. We are transforming our food. Take, for example, cabbage. Cabbage already, it's a cruciferous vegetable. It has this sulforaphane that I've been heralding as the ultimate cancer crusher. But if you take that cabbage, one of perhaps the 10 healthiest foods on the planet, and you submerge it in a saltwater solution, and you could use a minimal amount of salt. You could use very, very little. But you submerge that cabbage. There are bacteria that are living on the leaves of that cabbage that will take that, and in the course of about 7 days, it will change from cabbage into sauerkraut. And in that process, it is unlocking vitamins that you did not have access to previously. It is growing probiotic bacteria. They are multiplying. They are part of the food now. And there are studies that have been coming out recently that are showing us that they actually can affect and enhance our microbiome. And you're actually transforming the fiber, believe it or not. I said that all plants have their own unique types of fiber. And the fiber that you would find in sauerkraut is actually different than the fiber that you would find in cabbage by itself. And that allows you to enhance and grow even more populations of microbes in your gut. So I'm a huge fan of fermented foods. I think that they have been lost in the American diet, where we, have instead opted for processed foods and excessive amounts of animal products. And I think it's time for us to bring them back. Some of my personal favorites: I love sauerkraut. I think that everyone should make their own. It's incredibly fun, incredibly easy, and it's delicious. And it's nothing like the canned stuff that you ate as a child. I like kimchi. I think it's wonderful. Sourdough bread is my preferred type of bread. If I could have any type of bread, it would be sourdough. And I also enjoy experimenting with different plants. And so, for example, a plant that I don't particularly love, Joe, but that I do love fermented, are radishes. They are absolutely incredible when you ferment them because they maintain their crunch, but they lose some of the spice. And I'll throw some radishes in a solution with peppercorns, dill, some cloves of garlic, submerge all that, and give it about a week, and you have a pickle-flavored radish that is delicious, and it's tangy.
Oh, that sounds fascinating.
I'm drooling a little bit just talking about it.
Let me ask you a quick question about the cover of your book. It's got a kiwi on it. What is it about kiwis that made it to the cover?
I think, to be perfectly honest with you, what it is about kiwis above all else is it's extremely attractive to the eye. And so from the perspective of a book publisher, you want a book cover that is attractive to the eye. But I do think that fruit is something that we have inappropriately vilified and is often misunderstood. People will make claims that fruit causes weight gain. It does not. When we study it, people lose weight when they eat fruit. People will make claims that because of the sugar content of fruit, that fruit causes diabetes. Also untrue. Fruit actually improves type 2 diabetes and insulin resistance. You can eat berries and you will actually improve the control of your blood sugar. And the reason why these things are true is because fruit in its whole form, grown in nature, contains fiber. And fiber helps to balance out any sugars or sweetness that are there.
Dr. Bulsiewicz, you talked about the value of fermented foods. And I'm guessing their fermented foods are also prebiotic. They're good for the microbiome. Can you talk a little bit about probiotics? Because I think Americans are kind of confused about the idea of pre versus probiotics.
I would love to even take it one step further and introduce your audience to something incredibly cool that they've never heard of, which are postbiotics. So let me start with probiotics. I would imagine that most have heard of probiotics. They are living bacteria, living yeast, living organisms that have been shown in our studies to have beneficial effects for human health. We often think of these probiotics as coming in a capsule. You know, you swallow your probiotic pill or your capsule, and it has these living organisms. But guess what, guys? Probiotics are already there inside of you. They already exist. All we need to do to get them on board and to get them helping us and giving us those health benefits is we need to empower them. We need to energize them with their preferred food. And that preferred food are prebiotics. The classic prebiotic, as we've discussed during our conversation today, is fiber. Soluble fiber is the preferred food of the anti-inflammatory microbes that live inside of you. When you consume soluble fiber, you are enhancing those microbes, you are making them grow, and then the beautiful thing is they want to reward you by releasing short-chain fatty acids. These short-chain fatty acids are insanely powerful. They are the most amazing thing in nutrition that I've ever discovered, and yet no one is talking about them. They reverse leaky gut, they lower cholesterol, they prevent type 2 diabetes, they help with weight control by activating our satiety hormones. We believe that they reverse coronary artery disease. They travel all the way up to the brain from the gut, and they can actually enhance our brain, our memory, our focus, repair the blood-brain barrier. We even have studies that suggest that they can prevent Alzheimer's disease. They are powerful. These short-chain fatty acids are the product of fiber coming into contact with healthy bacteria. Short-chain fatty acids are postbiotics. The point is this. There is a formula, Joe. Probiotics plus prebiotics produces the postbiotics. You need both. If you had the microbes, but you don't give them fiber, you don't get anything. If you have the fiber, but you didn't have a microbiome, you don't get anything. But when fiber meets healthy microbes, you get magic. It's Harry Potter stuff. And the results are postbiotic short-chain fatty acids that are incredibly powerful at healing you.
Dr. Bulsiewicz, when we eat is also important. Can you tell us a bit about that?
It's quite fascinating, Terry, because all life on this planet has a circadian rhythm, which means that they have a natural time clock inside of them that has been synchronized to the rise and fall of the sun. When I say all life, I mean us. I mean the trees and the plants outside. And I also mean the microbes that live inside of us. And they've done these interesting studies where they see that there are differences in the way that our microbiome behaves based upon simply the timing of our food. Insulin resistance is affected by our microbiome. When we have insulin resistance, we are more likely to spike our blood sugar. And if you give a human being, and they've done these studies, if you give a person literally the exact same meal, but you give it to them at 8 a.m. versus 8 p.m., the 8 p.m. meal is going to spike their blood sugar much more than the 8 a.m. meal. And it has to do with the circadian rhythm within our microbiome.
Dr. Bulsiewicz, we hear a lot about leaky gut, and I know that gastroenterologists like yourself have a much more, I'll call it sanitized description, intestinal permeability. Can you tell us, is it real? Why is it? And what can we do about it if it does exist?
Leaky gut is real, but not everything that you read on the internet about leaky gut is real. So we have to be very cautious about where we choose to offer our confidence or who we choose to believe when it comes to our health. The idea of leaky gut really comes from dysbiosis. Dysbiosis means a loss of balance or harmony within the gut. And there are three things that happen when a person develops dysbiosis within their gut. Let me walk you through that real quick, if that's okay.
Sure.
Number one, there is a loss of balance within the microbes themselves. You see less good guys, you see more bad guys. When I'm talking about good versus bad, good means anti-inflammatory, reducing inflammation. Bad means inflammatory. They are promoting inflammation throughout the body. When we have dysbiosis, we lose that balance and we have more bad guys and less good guys. We also see a loss of diversity within the microbiome. Step two, this change in the microbes affects the lining of the intestine. We discussed that there is a single layer of cells, the epithelial layer. That layer of cells is held together by what are called tight junctions. And if you break open those tight junctions, you are opening up holes in the lining of the colon. These would not be visible to me during colonoscopy, but these holes are there on a microscopic level that are allowing things to leak out of the intestine. This is the leaky gut. This can also be increased intestinal permeability. And what I'm saying is that's a part of dysbiosis. And step three, when a person develops dysbiosis, is that because they have increased intestinal permeability and because they have more bad microbes, the inflammatory microbes, you get the release of something called bacterial endotoxin. And if you read anything about bacterial endotoxin, what you're going to discover is that this is effectively inflammation. And it causes an inflammatory response throughout the body. Could be a smoldering, low-grade inflammation, or it could be responsible for full-on sepsis. But the point is that dysbiosis is manifest with increased intestinal permeability or leaky gut. Leaky gut is real. It's a part of dysbiosis. And the solution is to reverse dysbiosis. And what I mentioned briefly during the show is that postbiotic short-chain fatty acids, which we get from the consumption of fiber, short-chain fatty acids affect all steps that I just mentioned. They repair the tight junctions. They close off the increased intestinal permeability. They restore the balance to the microbes. They get more good guys on the battlefield, and they actually directly inhibit the bad guys. So the point is that we want more of this fiber. And one of the issues, Joe, is that 97% of Americans are not getting enough of it.
Dr. B, a lot of people have irritable bowel syndrome, and they go to the doctor, and the doctor, who might even be a gastroenterologist like yourself, says, I can't find anything wrong with you, even though you're having all these terrible digestive problems. Is there a solution to irritable bowel syndrome?
100%. The solution is to get to the root of the problem. And the root of the problem is damage to the gut microbiome. We know that when a person develops dysbiosis, one of the ways that they can manifest that dysbiosis is with irritable bowel syndrome. Irritable bowel syndrome, just to be clear for the listeners, is characterized by abdominal pain and a change in bowel habits, whether that be diarrhea, constipation, or both. And people who have IBS, they will have pain and then they will have a bowel movement. And when they have that bowel movement, they actually have improvement of their pain. That's one of the characteristic features. What's interesting, Terry, is that when we've studied irritable bowel syndrome, we've discovered that there are all of these things going on that are very hard for us to quantify or measure. There's a change in the motility of the intestine, meaning that if it moves too fast, you get diarrhea. If it moves too slow, you get constipation. The other thing that you get with irritable bowel syndrome is you get something called visceral hypersensitivity. Our gut is carpeted with 500 million nerves. They are all right now inside of us, feeling and sensing. And if you have visceral hypersensitivity, what that means is those nerves are jumpy. They are reacting to things that they shouldn't react to. And as a result, the person that has IBS is going to feel pain when others would feel nothing at all. So the issue with irritable bowel is due to alteration or damage to the microbiome. When you alter or damage the microbiome, it affects motility. It affects the sensitivity of those nerves. And as a result, you get the manifestation of irritable bowel. The solution is to get to the root of the problem. It's not just to treat constipation. It's not just to treat the diarrhea. The solution is to restore a healthy gut microbiome, reverse dysbiosis, and in doing so, you will reverse irritable bowel.
Dr. B, there's a much more serious condition called inflammatory bowel, not to be confused with irritable bowel syndrome. And we've heard of late that some gastroenterologists are actually doing something that a lot of people find a little yucky, but that is a fecal transplant, which presumably is trying to reestablish a more healthy microbiome. Can you tell us a little bit about that, please?
Fecal transplant is a concept that when I was in medical school 15 years ago, I was disgusted by this idea. And just a few years later, I'm talking about I was in medical school in the early 2000s. Just a few years later, when I was a GI fellow in around 2010, we were seeing cases of an infection called C. diff that were unresponsive to antibiotics. This C. diff infection had become so intense that it was one of the top causes of death in the United States. Over 30,000 people were dying per year around this time. And we didn't have a solution. Our antibiotics were not working. You would have people on antibiotics for months at a time, literally. And what happened is we turned to the least likely of places, which is human stool. And we started using human stool as medicine. And when you do a fecal transplant, it sounds disgusting. It's actually rather simple. I do a colonoscopy, and during the colonoscopy, while the patient's asleep, I basically just push a syringe, which has this feculent material. The patient's not aware that it happened. There's really not much to it. But what's amazing is that you take this person with that has a life-threatening infection that is resistant to antibiotics. You give them a fecal transplant, and within 24 to 48 hours, they are perfectly fine. And it works almost 100% of the time. It's incredibly powerful. What you are doing is restoring a healthy gut microbiome. You are restoring balance. And when you restore balance, those microbes outnumber the C. diff infection, and they will suppress that bacteria to the point that it doesn't do anything anymore. Now, Joe, the question of fecal transplant for inflammatory bowel disease is very interesting. We are not allowed at the moment to use fecal transplant as a treatment for inflammatory bowel disease. it is not approved by the FDA. The only indication that we can do fecal transplant is for a C. diff infection. But that being said, we have studies that are ongoing right now to answer the question whether or not restoring the microbiome with a fecal transplant could be a solution for people who have inflammatory bowel disease. And I'm going to give you a preview. My thought or my expectation is that in order for this to work, you also have to change your diet and lifestyle. Because if you give them a fecal transplant, but you don't change your diet to support the new microbiome, you're just going to go back to your old microbiome within a few weeks.
Now, Dr. B, isn't it the possibility that part of the reason that a fecal transplant works so well for C. diff is that you're giving it during a colonoscopy, and prior to the colonoscopy, people have pretty well washed their colons out. They don't have a lot of their own microbes left.
That's true. The person who ends up with a fecal transplant for C. diff infection has been on antibiotics, very powerful antibiotics, and they are always sustained in the days leading up to the actual procedure. And then they do a complete cleanse for the colonoscopy. And we know that, it's interesting, 70% of the weight of your stool is actually your microbiota. 70%, which is really strange to imagine because you would think that it's just the excrement from your food, but it's not. And so when we flush out our bowels entirely, we are removing part of our microbiome in the process.
Well, that brings up an interesting question because here you are, a gastroenterologist performing routine colonoscopies to reduce the risk of colon cancer. How does flushing out that colon to prepare for a colonoscopy, how does that affect the microbiome, and how do we restore the microbiome to its prior healthy state after such a procedure?
So, Joe, it's interesting. Anything that we do in medicine, in my mind, every single recommendation that I make to my patients, I have a scale of balance of risk versus benefit. And I'm putting things on that scale of balance on both sides to determine, does the benefit outweigh the risk? And there is always risk in any choice that you make. And when you have a colonoscopy, it does have a temporary effect on the microbiome. But the benefit is so powerful because we have the ability to protect ourselves using this tool from the number 2 cause of cancer death in America. There are 140,000 people who will be diagnosed with colon cancer this year, and the vast majority of them will be people who have not had a colonoscopy or are not up to date on their colonoscopy. And so to me, when I weigh those things on the scale of balance, there's a very strong inclination towards the benefit of the colonoscopy against the risk. But I think it's an interesting point, Joe, because of this. There are people who are doing colonic therapy, colonic hydrotherapy, which is effectively doing the same thing that you would do for a colonoscopy. And these people are using this as a treatment for constipation. And each time that they go for their colonic hydrotherapy, they're doing the same thing that they would do for a colonoscopy. They're flushing out in their entirety. And I worry that these people are actually causing harm to themselves in the process of doing this. So it's not that there's there's risk associated with flushing out the bowels. When you get the benefit of the colonoscopy, I think that's a positive benefit for sure. But when there is no positive benefit, when you're just simply flushing out your bowels because you think that's the solution for constipation, that's pure downside. I don't see any upside to that, and I worry about that. The solution to healing, in this case, flushing out your bowels, or the solution to healing if you've taken antibiotics, is the same. It starts with fiber. A plant-based diet is the important piece to bring those microbes back. Feed the good guys and get them back on board immediately. A prebiotic supplement can also be of value. It can be of benefit. I would encourage people to make sure they do not sabotage their gut. Don't sabotage your gut with alcohol or with excessive amounts of saturated fat or with processed foods. Try not to do that. And the last thing that's kind of interesting, you guys, is that the conventional therapy for years now has been to give a probiotic. And there was a study published in the journal Cell in 2018 out of the Weizmann Institute in Israel that showed us that it is actually causing more harm to take a probiotic after antibiotics or after a colonoscopy. It is causing more harm to do that than to just allow your body to heal naturally.
Dr. Bulsiewicz, this is really kind of unfair, but I am going to ask you about the fiber-fueled 4-week plan. Can you give us just 1-minute overview, please? What should we know about it?
The fiber-fueled 4-week plan was designed to take a person with the food sensitivities that we've been discussing today, the person who has a damaged gut microbiome with dysbiosis, and take them by the hand and walk them through the process of healing their gut from start to finish. 4 weeks is an intentional number. It was not an arbitrary thing that I came up with. As I was doing the research for the book, I came back to this number 4 weeks time after time and kept finding that after 4 weeks, you could radically transform your gut microbiome. So the fiber-fueled 4 weeks is a collection of 80 recipes, all plant-based, strategically, specially designed to be introduced at specific times and to allow you to heal your gut and reverse dysbiosis. And every person who does this plan is going to have their own unique experience as they do it because, Terry, we all have a gut microbiome that is as unique as a fingerprint. There is no one size fits all. So my plan is not one size fits all. My plan is designed to be adapted and molded to your unique needs, your unique microbiome.
Dr. Will Bulsiewicz, thank you ever so much for talking with us on the People's Pharmacy today.
Such a pleasure and a treat to be with you guys today. Thank you so much.
You've been listening to Dr. Will Bulsiewicz. He's a gastroenterologist, gut health expert, and the author of Fiber Fueled, the plant-based gut health program for losing weight, restoring your health, and optimizing your microbiome.
Lynn Siegel produced today's show. Al Wodarski engineered. Dave Graydon edits our interviews.
The People's Pharmacy is produced at the studios of North Carolina Public Radio, WUNC. This week, the show was recorded in our home studio.
The People's Pharmacy theme music is by B.J. Liederman.
The People's Pharmacy is brought to you in part by Verizana, an analytical laboratory providing home health tests for hormones, gut health, and the microbiome. Online at verisana.com.
And by CocoVia, offering plant-based nutrients in the form of cocoa flavanols for brain and heart health. Online at cocovia.com.
Also by Kaya Biotics, probiotic products made in Germany from certified organic ingredients. KAYA Biotics.com.
To buy a CD of today's show or any other People's Pharmacy episode, you can call 800-732-2334. Today's show, number 1222. The number again, 800-732-2334, online at peoplespharmacy.com.
When you visit the website, you could also subscribe to the podcast. Our conversation with Dr. Bulsiewicz included a few topics we didn't have time for today. If you're interested in leaky gut or irritable bowel syndrome, you'll want to be sure to listen. We also discussed the use of fecal transplants as a potential treatment for inflammatory bowel disease and a proven treatment for C. diff. Have you ever wondered how to restore your microbiome after a colonoscopy? Be sure to listen to the podcast. Available through Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Google Podcasts, or your favorite podcast provider. You can also find it on our website every Monday morning.
At our website, you can sign up for our free online newsletter to get the latest news about COVID-19 and other important health stories. In Durham, North Carolina, I'm Joe Graydon.
And I'm Terry Graydon. Thank you for listening. Please join us again next week.